My name is Monica Rao. I'm Director of Real Estate at REW. I'm pretty sure I've either met you all by face tonight, and I certainly have emailed every single one of you. So thank you so much for coming. We're so excited to be here in this beautiful space at the Outpost. We're so happy to be partnering with Marcon here for this event, Behind the Headlines. I don't think I need to speak too much on the title itself, but there has been, of course, a lot of confusion and uncertainty on what really is coming out across media outlets, and this is a really challenging and changing time, and we're happy to be here to answer some questions for that. Victoria, our wonderful host, is the Director of Client Services at Vancouver-based public relations agency TalkShop. After starting her career as a journalist, Victoria transitioned into public relations, working with clients in the real estate and development sector. With an astute understanding of what makes a headline, Victoria has had some great success in garnering impactful media coverage for her clients. In addition to her role at TalkShop, Victoria is a lecturer at UBC's Sauder School of Business. Victoria, I'll hand it over to you to introduce our panelists.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Monica. And it's so nice to be here tonight in the host role, speaking to all of you and being able to moderate this conversation. First, here we have Simon from REW. We have Ernest from Promerita. We have Jenny from Oakwyn. And we have Nick from Marcon. So as Monica mentioned, I work at TalkShop. We're a local public relations agency. We're based in Vancouver with offices in Kelowna, Calgary, and Toronto. Media relations is our bread and butter service at TalkShop, and to that, our bread and butter industry is real estate. I've worked primarily in the development sector for the last 5 years, and working behind the scenes to try and support developers in telling the stories of their projects. You really learn the important role that media plays in helping to get right what is going on in the news. Sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they really miss the mark. The impetus for tonight's conversation is to talk about last week's interest rate announcement and then also make sense of just what is going on in this real estate market in a sort of post-pandemic world and on the cusp of a possible recession as well, which our panelists will get into tonight in way more detail with their conversation. But I think what we really want to dig into tonight is headlines that are coming out, and the panelists, each of them have chosen a news story. The selection of news stories that were chosen tonight come from such a great range of media that speak to audiences that you can tell have different levels of understanding, whether they're a bit more technical or whether it's a bit more high-level news of the day. We're going to start off with Simon, and same as Monica, I prefer not to read when I'm talking to a crowd, but these panelists failed to keep their bios to 2 sentences. Simon has 15 years of experience in real estate marketplaces and software. He's run online real estate portals in a number of markets around the world. Simon is currently the president of REW, which stands for Real Estate Works, a leading real estate marketplace here in BC and across Canada. REW is currently expanding its offering into the areas of content creation, mortgage transactions, and new home advisory services, which aligns with Simon's passion to make good on REW's mission of being the ultimate guide in people's real estate adventure. What we want to hear from you is where the headline is from, and to summarize the article and why you found it compelling.
Sure, thank you, Victoria, and thanks for the introduction. I think just touching on a few things, we heard the words pandemic, we heard the words possible recession, and we heard the words media uncertainty. It's an uncertain time, and so when you see headlines like this, it's just, it can stoke the emotion around real estate. So REW sees most of the real estate demand, certainly in BC, come through its platform at some stage in the home-seeking journey, and increasingly it's been from younger, millennial, and perhaps even Gen Z buyers that are looking to get into the market. And so when you read a headline that rising interest rates are a boon for younger buyers, immediately I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean? And then you go into the article, and the article's basically saying, well, if you're saving for a down payment, well, now you can make more interest on the money that you're saving for a down payment. I was like, okay. I don't think any young buyer that's trying to enter the market, that's trying to be equipped for this difficult process of acquiring real estate, certainly the first time they've ever done it, is going to think that 2.5%, 3% on cash savings is going to help them do it. They're looking for solutions far beyond that. And I think that's part of the problem with the kind of media landscape that we have around real estate right now, is that it's not offering any of those solutions. So we think about that quite deeply, and I know other panelists here think about possible solutions to major issues like housing availability, housing affordability, and bringing a younger class of buyers into the market. Those are really important things that we do need to find solutions for, and certainly the headlines and the current market environment is not helping. We've seen a huge growth in house prices. What that does now as the interest rates turn is obviously price younger buyers out. And one of the other things that we've seen that goes to this headline is an increasing share of investor buyers in pre-sales. If you go back 2014, 15, 16, maybe it was 10 to 20% of buyers in some of Vancouver's biggest projects are investor buyers. Now it's like over 40%, and they are the ones that are competing most with first-time buyers because they're going after the same inventory. So this was a headline that for me kind of sums up number one, the misinformation around the current market conditions, and number two, the lack of solutions being offered, particularly to younger millennial buyers.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Simon. All right, next we're going to go to Jenny. So Jenny One is a powerhouse broker and founder of full-service boutique real estate sales and marketing company, holding a portfolio of over 50 multifamily projects in her 19-year career. Completing over $1 billion worth of sales in Metro Vancouver, she is known to build strategic platforms for real estate developers and agents, leading countless marketing campaigns and championing cohesive, top-performing sales teams. Jenny is the broker-owner of Oakland Realty Northwest and has emerged as a powerful voice for the industry as a moderator and speaker for real estate conferences.
Thank you, Victoria. This article resonated with me. It was published by Vancouver Sun last week, and I live and breathe new home sales and developments. I get the privilege of working with developers on a daily basis, and my nose is in their books. One of the biggest perceptions that I think has come out of this article and many other conversations is the fact that people are thinking prices will come down and developers will give big discounts. I haven't seen that in the last 10 months. The reality is that in BC, out of all provinces, developers have the lowest profit margins. The conversations around that is the rising cost in construction, wages, shortage of the supply chains, the inability to get funding for land acquisitions, the cost of borrowing, and as you guys know, very difficult to get application processes and building permits being processed. The conversation around price reduction often derives to, okay, well, should we just convert it into a rental building rather than reducing prices? But here's the reality. Developers don't want to be property managers. Based on, let's say, the end of last quarter, 76% of homes that have already started construction, 76% of those homes have already been sold. If projects are being shelved right now, developers, all they really want to do is maximize profit because of their low margins. If the goal for federal government is to bring down the inflation to 2%, we know Bank of Canada is going to reduce the rates by the end of next year. Projects, as we know, takes 24 months, 36 months, even more. And if you were to reserve one today, we're hoping that rates will be going down in the next year or so. As you probably saw last week, there's been 150 contracts papered in New West. Some big developers right now are launching very creative campaigns. They're really succeeding and really standing out amongst the ones that are shelving their products. I'm usually standing behind the door with the developer. We generally are raising prices by $10,000 every hour or so as 5 homes are sold. My question to you is, would you rather be buyer number 5 or buyer number 50, who's paid about $80,000 more than buyer number 5? So my suggestion is to buy a home today and just wait it out. And I've always, myself, has, from my own experience, serviced myself and purchased a pre-sale project. Usually about 50 to 60% of the projects that I've sold, and I've never lost more than what I bought it at. So, yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Jenny. Next up, we're going to hear from Ernest Lang, who is the CEO of Promerita. Ernest has a background in business, finance, and real estate. He founded Promerita Group, a capital investment and advisory company in real estate and private equity in the early 2000s. Ernest is frequently relied upon by corporations and private family groups to provide strategic business and financial advice and to develop effective risk management, capital allocation, and investment strategies. Ernest has a special interest in housing policy and has been invited to present his findings to senior policymakers.
Thanks, Victoria. My experiences in real estate actually started when I was about 7 or 8. My father was a realtor before he passed away, but I used to go to his open houses, on the weekends. I've been professionally in real estate since my first year of undergrad in 1992. This is, I guess, my 30th year of being in real estate. We're going to talk about the headline. So there was a headline that came out about a week ago. I'm interested in seniors issues because part of our group, we own Canada's largest seniors life lease community in Hamilton. It's a very interesting and very sort of community-oriented way to provide housing slightly more affordably for the seniors market. But a lot of the narrative regarding affordability tends to be, well, all the baby boomers have all this real estate equity and the millennials and Gen Z are kind of screwed. There's a lot of truth to it, but there's actually a lot of value in this particular headline. So this is about a lady in Toronto. She has been working since the age of 15, but she became homeless for a period of time in Toronto recently until a nonprofit charity social services agency essentially rescued her from the home because of affordability is impacting everyone. And I think the point of this headline, it highlights the fact that the division is not necessarily between generational cohorts. It's not sort of the baby boomers against the millennials or the Gen Z. Really, the big division in our society today is between homeowners and people who are not homeowners. And that's a fundamental problem. So I am a first-generation immigrant. My family moved here from Singapore in the mid-'70s. And the reason we came to Canada at that time was Canada was really the land of milk and honey. In the mid-'70s, Canadian per capita income was number 3 in the world. Today, that has eroded greatly. Depending on the particular year and foreign exchange rates, we sort of range between number 14 to 20-something in terms of per capita income. And not that per capita income is the end-all and be-all of sort of a social success. It's not the only measure of successful society, but it is a very important measure. And my thesis is that because we have not addressed housing, we've allowed the housing issue to create an existential problem for our society. There's too much capital and too many people are struggling just to keep the lights on, so to speak. So when you have that much capital and that much human capital and attention spent on just trying to keep a roof over your head, all those dollars and all that human capital and energy and creativity and ability is not going into things like healthcare. It's not going into things like curing cancer. It's not going into things like education. And it's not going into investments in infrastructure. The division is not between generational cohorts. It's not us against them. It's we collectively as a society have not done housing right. The good news is there are other societies in other countries that have solved housing. And they've solved housing in circumstances that are far more challenging than what we face in Canada. So I do think there's a good news story. And one thing I'm glad to see with all these headlines about housing, Victoria made a comment that we have been and do get an opportunity to speak to policymakers and senior politicians who actually are decision makers at a very, very senior level. And I sense that it's because everybody recognizes as a society we face an existential issue, there is greater willingness to sort of transcend political division and differences in ideology to adopt an all-hands-on-deck approach to solve this issue, and it is solvable. That's all I wanted to say about this headline.
All right, thank you, Ernest. Our fourth panelist to introduce their headline for us tonight is Nick Paolella, who is the Executive Vice President at Marcon. As the EVP, Nick is an experienced real estate leader who oversees all facets of Marcon's development work. Driven by a pursuit of excellence, he takes pride in delivering best-in-class communities and leading a growing team of like-minded individuals who strive to improve the urban landscape in which we live.
Hey everyone. Indexing the conversation here, thinking about what was relevant in my view today, trying to get behind the media landscape and people making their, in this case, real estate decisions based on what they're seeing. A couple of articles struck me. One was written in the beginning of the month, I see October 6th, and the other one was written on the 26th. And the interesting part is you see a tale of two different stories with the headlines. One is Bank of Canada's hawkish message bolsters case for another large rate hike. So this was everybody discussing the signaling towards 75 basis points, maybe higher, a narrative. And most of this article, it's not an issue with the reporting so much as it was largely just a regurgitation of the Governor of the Bank of Canada's commentary about where things were headed. And then similarly, you go, about 2 weeks later, now the rate hike happens, it's less than what was forecasted, and immediately the article is talking about, maybe breaking the back of inflation ahead, echoing everything that the governor had to say about the market, including starting to use terms like dovish moves in the market with interest rates. I'm thinking, holy smokes, like in the span of 3 weeks, it's amazing just how much can change. And the reality of it is this is exactly the kind of Kool-Aid that we're supposed to drink right now. This is the point. The media signaling is there. The stance that the government of Canada or the Bank of Canada takes on matters related to interest rates is specifically to induce us as citizens of the country to make different spending choices. That is the entire point. It's actually the system working, beating inflation out of our world, and trying to do that in a way that lands us as softly as possible in an economy as we go forward. And so I think with that, then people say, well, how do I make my real estate choices around this? And there's a couple things that come to mind for me when we look at the real estate landscape. In our world, we're kind of multifaceted in our investment approach in the condominium space and rental and seniors housing, hotel, retail, et cetera. And so we're kind of looking at this applying all lenses. And I think of something when we talk about the condo world in particular. I expect that's what most of you want to hear about tonight, so we'll focus on that. People are really more than anything looking for the floor. They're asking themselves, is this the right time to buy, and can I afford it, of course? And in our market, the biggest driver that keeps our industry growing and has the need for this housing and creates the housing crisis that was discussed a moment ago is really about population growth. And so when folks are in a point of kind of observing some economic turmoil and wondering whether they should take a leap, firstly, it's the question of affordability. And then the second question is am I getting a deal right now? And getting a deal necessitates that there are deals to be had, that there's product available that someone needs to part with in order to get themselves out of a sticky situation. And what I would proffer in the moment that we're in right now is people are taking that pause because there's been, in the moment now, because there's been a lot of escalation in the housing market pricing over the last couple of years. The same thing happened back in 2018 when the foreign buyers tax came through. We had we just came off a period of some significant price escalation. And it would have anybody wondering when things were going to slow down and flatten out, because things can't move exponentially forward in terms of price and absorption velocities. It's not sustainable. And so usually the market is playing into these driving forces until there's some sort of evidence, rightly or wrongly, that says maybe we should pull back. And what does the development industry do? Well, most of the development industry that I see it is a mature market, highly competed, largely well-capitalized developers, largely lower risk underwriting in the marketplace. This has been a period, despite all the price growth, where development margins have not been growing. They've been staying kind of consistent. And so it has everybody just retracting their plans for supply in the market. Strategically, we see the opportunity to continue to be players in the market because we do see buyers and we see that there's still absorption happening regardless. But it means that the deals to be had just aren't there. There isn't miscellaneous supply out there in the market that needs to go to a fire sale. And when we're coming off the backs of now signaling in 3 weeks that inflation may be coming to an end in the near future, people asking themselves if they want to buy a pre-sale that's 2 to 4 years out need to be really asking themselves if they should continue to sit on the fence. And so that's, for us, why we see comfort in continuing to go forward and feel like we're going to be in another period where people will have waited and then waited to the point where things are starting to run away on them again. And we know that that's not a fun headspace for people to be in when they're making home choices.
All right, thanks so much, Nick. And to touch on one point that Nick spoke on was population. So we actually have a fifth headline to discuss tonight, and we're going to have hear input from all of our speakers. But earlier this week, there was an article from the National Post that came out, "Immigration has never been higher, and Canadians have never been more pleased with it." This came out October 31st, and then this morning, for those of you that are up to speed on the news, there was an additional announcement on new immigration targets of 500,000 new immigrants or new Canadians in 2025. So it's even more timely, and the story on the news tonight is going to be about that, and then where are those people going to live, and it plays into housing. So we'll turn it over to the panel to share their thoughts on this headline as well, and maybe we'll start with Jenny.
Well, this is fantastic news. I mean, what we still have to address is where are we gonna place them? Where are they gonna live? We're just not building enough homes. When buyers' demands are more than the supply, there's always going to be an affordability issue. There's always going to be a demand on rising prices. The great thing is that if these immigrants are well-educated, they're skillful, that's going to be a fantastic point for our city where we lack the trades, we lack, the people that we need to be able to kind of forcefully add on to our skill sets.
Okay, thank you. And Simon.
I mean, that's good news, that headline, because if there are 400,000 odd new immigrants, I'm 400,001 of those. And I do think immigration is a huge driver of modern developed economies. But the people coming, myself included, come for a reason. They come for the opportunity that the country affords them, and that opportunity is both financial and kind of work-related, but also social. And so if you want to absorb this kind of immigration and you believe that it's necessary for the development of the country going forward, I think the article goes on to say that Canada could be 50 million people by 2040, which is really exciting, because if you think about that, in terms of G7 nations, that kind of population growth really puts us on the map. But you're only going to get that level of absorption and interest from other places in the world if you are indeed more attractive than other places in the world. And certainly Canada historically has been that, but going forward, the absolute biggest issue to solve is housing. I've had opportunity to run real estate marketplaces in all sorts of different parts of the world, and this ratio is completely different in other parts of the world. So what you take for granted here in Canada, like, houses cost that much, they don't cost that much. If you're in Spain, where I used to live before, it's probably 40% cheaper related to incomes than it is here. There's significant cost to own or to rent as it relates to income in Canada, and that's an issue that ultimately is going to impinge on those targets. You can set whatever targets you want, you can want whatever population dynamics you want, but ultimately the attractiveness of that opportunity for immigrants is what's going to matter.
The article with regards to today's news was that the federal government is increasing its total target such that it'll be about 500,000 new immigrants per year. So they want 1.4 million people to come by 2024, I think, or 25. Anyways, it's about 500,000 people per year, new Canadians. And with respect to the housing, here's the issue. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I'm a big fan of immigration because I do think it's really, when you think about our demographic situation, we have an aging population. A lot of our programs were designed when they were designed to ensure 5 working people could support 1 retired person. That ratio is now down to about 3.5 working people. If well-designed immigration policy will help bolster the labor pools, improve productivity, and also bolster the tax base in order to fund these programs. If it's well-designed, that's an important part. But in order to have that level of immigration without exacerbating the current social resentments and frankly the conflict that's been really highlighted by the pandemic, we need to make sure that we have the housing supply. Before you can really discuss and have an intelligent conversation about affordability, you need to make sure you have availability. Canada currently has a shortfall of 1.8 million homes compared to the average of the G7. I happen to know the former Associate Deputy Minister of Housing. We were talking about what are their targets for British Columbia. Now, CMHC has identified, they've published this research, that in their estimation, British Columbia needs an additional 580,000 homes above and beyond the natural home supply. So the aggregate number over the next 8 to 10 years is probably about 1 million homes. Now, if you just do the math on it, the average home price in British Columbia is about $760,000. So if you just do the math, 1 million homes is $760 billion. That's what we need to build. It is so far, I mean, I'm sure Nick will say that's so far, it's a mind-blowing number. But, you know.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into Nick.
From a regional housing capacity question, I think it's important to separate a couple of things. One is we have a system for entitlement meaning like zoning, that is, I would say, inefficient. But at the end of the day, housing supply is still available. Developers can buy land, and I would proffer that in today's world, anybody with the capital could go find more developable land now. So it's not like there's zero out there, and I think that's a bit of a misnomer. I think it's absolutely accurate that development inherently is actually more risky, and risk-adjusted returns are a huge part of the equation. If we have to work through a system that is massively more inefficient and risky, then the risk that goes with that investment is higher. The reward has to be higher for anybody to warrant doing it. Most people would say you got to make enough out of that risk profile to invest. When you think about that in our arena, it's saying, well, a lot more housing supply would be good, but there's two dimensions at play. One is you get to a moment like now where people aren't consuming the houses, so developers aren't building it. And it's difficult to make rental economics work for private or institutional investors at this point in the very moment with interest rate volatility. So while the supply may exist, it's not being built. If someone wanted to go procure more land for development right in this moment and start a process, most of them could. And if we were building more, and one of the biggest reasons to development economics being challenged in the last year and a half is our construction costs, which are up about 30% in 2 years. If you were to execute that, the resources are extremely thin to get it done. We've got approximately 3,000 homes under construction across the region right now. And I can tell you that it is a constant battle to procure the resources to get things done. And I believe that this will be, despite immigration, our continued challenge for years to come. You have brain drain happening. You have journeyman carpenters with more apprentices and laborers than they've ever had. And so we're trying to apply different tools. You're starting to look at technology. You're trying to look at prefabrication. You're trying to get further up the kind of automation chain in construction to get more productivity, but it's really hard. So you've got immigration working for us, and that will persist for all the reasons that were previously stated. It's a must for the sustainability of our economy. Given we're not generally a manufacturing economy or a resource economy, the extra stimulus is going to come from population growth. And so when we look at those two factors, and someone's asking themselves, again, the question is like, is now the right time to get into the market? I say, well, as long as your headspace for the duration, how long you intend to be in the market, as long as you have a reasonable time frame for how long you think you're going to be active in that market, how long you're going to live in that home, or how long you're going to sit on that rental investment or whatever, it's very hard to see a world where we are going to, by creating more supply in the market, going to bring prices down in a meaningful way.